Isamu Ōyama. I'm a Japanese artist with an Italian background, and I moved to New York in 2012 as an artist, and since then I live and work in New York City. The big influence on my work is the graffiti culture, which is first developed in New York City throughout 70s and 80s, and now it's pretty worldwide. And as a teenager in Japan, I was very much influenced by graffiti culture, like spray paint, aerosol writing culture, that kind of thing. And that is the core of my expression, I think, and that's how people recognize my work first. Most of my art activities in Japan and in US, not really in Italy, honestly. So speaking about Japan and US, I think in US, people see more Asian elements in my work, while in Japan, well, I'm from Tokyo, which is the capital of Japan, and it's very different from other areas in Japan. It's like a New York and the rest of US maybe. So I think in Japan, people see my work more like urban thing, urban culture, and but here it's more mixture of maybe urban and some sort of Asian element. Well, I think it does, but it's kind of under surface level. It's not very like conscious or not very obviously visible in a way, because, for example, I use SUNY ink, which is ink for calligraphy, Asian calligraphy originally, and I use it, but not just because it's not because I'm from Japan. It's not just because of that. I used it because it's just as material. It was very convenient to use because I make like long lines, and if I use just a regular house paint, even if it's mixed with water, it doesn't really give a clean and long line. But with this SUNY ink, it can go very long and very, and it still gives like really deep black effect. So that's very like practical and expression reason for me to use SUNY ink, but not because it symbolizes any Asian identity. But eventually, if I use that, then it becomes part of my work, and people started to see it as one of my like ethnic elements. So I think that's how it was in my case. For me, tradition is not something just about the past. I think it's something that can be interpreted from the contemporary perspective and can be, good, how do you say, can be very innovative in the contemporary context as well. So it's not just looking back at the past, but there's this famous term in Japanese, onko-chishin, which means respecting the tradition and learning new from that. So I think tradition is something that has really deep accumulation of knowledge and techniques, so that you can, although it looks like old thing, you can still learn something from that and then, utilize it in your own way. Well, for me, it's like, again, my big influence is graffiti culture, which is contemporary thing, but my interest is kind of bridge. So this contemporary thing, culture, and this traditional thing. So, and then create my own language. So again, it's like something for me to learn from. The tradition is something that I can learn from, and then mix it with my other influence, and then create, my own language. Well, I'm a visual artist. I'm a painter mostly, you know. So I definitely my practice is you know it's a mixture like hybrid of a few different visual languages. So you know again it's one thing can be traditional language and the other one can be contemporary visual language. So yeah, my way is to mix them in the visual language, but not the level of like maybe not at the level of cultural symbolization or like level of like meanings, but more like visuals. You know, that's how I work. Technique-wise, I think my techniques or the way I work physically is more connected to the graffiti culture. But again, the element, the material that I use is one of them is sumi ink, which is pretty traditional, I guess. And yeah, that's one big connecting point for me in the practice. Yeah. Well, I think I do it in my own way, pretty much in my own way. I don't really have the background of, or I haven't really trained myself for the traditional techniques. So I think it's pretty my own way, and I don't really buy like very expensive traditional sumi ink or anything. I just buy regular stuff, and that's enough for me. Um, but I think that's still connection and the environment. Like when I was in Japan, here in New York, if you want to buy some ink, you have to go specific store and you kind of pay a lot to get it because it's kind of unique material. But in Japan, or maybe in other Asian countries, I guess it's something normal. So you can, if you go like regular stores, you find it and can get it. I think that environment is already kind of because it's there, you know, and that's still some sort of way, like a traditional environment there, and then I had access to the material in the daily life. So that's what happened to me. Um, so speaking about graffiti a little bit, it's pretty much global phenomenon now. It's like a worldwide thing. But I was particularly interested in the history of graffiti. That's in a way it's a short history comparing to the like a calligraphy, like Asian calligraphy, but it's still a small history, and it has a history of 40 years, 40, almost 50 years, so half century. He was born in was first born in New York, late 60s, and then And my interest was the history of writing culture, graffiti culture. So I really like artists from 70s and 80s, and I think New York graffiti has a it tends to be like close to the abstraction, and my work is also abstraction. And so for someone like Ramel Z, or for example, or Futura 2000, Phase 2, those artists are I think they're very important in the history of writing culture. But at the same time, I also like um, Japanese, post-war Japanese avant-garde calligraphers like Yuichi Inoue or Shiryu Morita. These are like relatively recent interests for me, so I still have to learn, but I'm very interested in because they were also kind of um, exploring the border between letters and abstraction, those calligraphers, And because they were calligraphers, they did abstraction a few times, but then they ended up with letters. So they kind of came back to letters. While those writers in New York, they used spray paint and to write names and letters, and some of them like became abstract artists. So the context is very different, but in terms of this tension between the letter shape and abstraction, I think they had a similar, issues. And my interest is personally to kind of bridge these two different contexts and absorb it into my own practice. I was just a teenager, regular high school student in Japan around like late 90s to early 2000. And there was a huge trend of street culture, not just graffiti, but a trend of like whole street culture, like fashion, skateboarding, hip hop music and things like that. And the writing culture was part of it. And I had a few other friends who were doing skateboarding and things like that, but I wanted something that nobody else is doing. So I kind of picked up graffiti writing, and that's how I first encountered. Then a lot of processes, but I kind of stuck with it and then developed my own thing. Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely, yes. But another interesting thing, probably very related to this interview, is it's more after I came to US that I started to have interest in the Asian culture. And that's maybe because I became more aware of my ethnic background. In a way, people see me in that context, and that was a kind of perspective from outside. But then I kind of internalized it a little bit, both consciously and unconsciously, maybe. And again, like I was using SUNY ink before I come here, but that was more for practical reasons. After coming to US, people say things like, "Oh, use SUNY ink. That makes sense because you're from Japan." And I was like, but then I kind of feel like, okay, but I'm very comfortable with SUNY ink actually than like regular house paint, and that's maybe because I kind of have a sensibility to it. So it's not like oh, I'm from Japan, so that's why I use this. It's not that obvious, but there's some sort of gradual kind of unconscious awareness. How can I say? I don't know how can I say, but it's kind of little by little thing. Maybe I give two examples. One is um, a project I did in New York in 2013, and the project was called Aero Mural, and it was in Clock Tower Gallery in Tribeca, and it was the first time I used sound in my practice. So it was like the first half of the project was like a regular mural. I painted mural on walls of the gallery, but I recorded the sound of the spray paint while I was creating the piece. And then in the middle of the show, I painted the mural back to white and replaced it with the sound of the spray. And so it was kind of it was a sound installation physically, but conceptually it was a mural, invisible mural, or like audible mural. And the sound is it's a vibration of air. So that means you don't really see it, but there's this invisible line that floating in the air. So the idea is like translating the visual lines on the wall to invisible lines in the air, like in the three-dimensional space. So that was the first time that I used sound and kind of tried to, push the boundaries of my own practice. So that was very kind of important to me. And then the other one is probably the one that I'm just having right now, which is the solo show at Marianna Kistra Beach Museum of Art in Kansas. And it just, it's very important just because it's first museum solo show in US, and also it happened with a curator who I've always been trying to work together in New York, but it didn't happen, and she became a curator of that museum in Kansas, so we kind of finally did a project together like over years. So that was kind of nice, and yeah. So it's actually composed of a lot of different elements. One is like regular gallery show, which is in the museum. So that's the main part of the show, with paintings and murals and stuff like that. But also we had that sound installation actually from 2013 in a different gallery, not in museum, but it's a university museum. So they have other buildings in campuses, right? So there's this building of art department, and they have their own small gallery. So we put sound installation in that building, and we also did a mural in out of campus in this business district near the campus. So to do that mural, I stayed in Kansas for 1 month. So it was kind of like an artist in residency program. And we also the museum did an art event in the museum's parking lot. So a lot of people came up, or like artists from other shows also came. And I did a live painting performance as like main content of the event. And after the performance, I continued to work on that piece and kind of finished as a piece. And that enters the collection of the museum. So all those elements are the component of the whole show. And we start to create a catalog soon, and we plan to include all those elements in the catalog. Graffiti, in 70s and 80s, they were painted on the side of the subway cars, right? And they traveled across the different boroughs in New York City. And at that time, or maybe still now, like people lived based on the ethnic groups in New York City. So Puerto Rican communities, this neighborhood, or like African American here, Koreans are here. So like it was kind of divided by ethnic groups. And so, but the intention of writers is to put their own name on the subway trains, and then it travels across these different neighborhoods. So it's not just physically traveling in different boroughs, but it's also culturally exposed to different ethnic groups. So that was kind of idea of, that reflects the idea of multiracial or multi-language even society, I think. And I really like that idea. So I kind of reinterpret the way how graffiti lives in the city. And then what I do is this motif that I call quick turn structure, this black and white shape, which comes from the graffiti visual language, but I kind of I established it as my own language. And this motif can be applied to different mediums. I'm mostly paintings because my initial expression is painting. But then canvases, murals, of course drawings, and sometimes like found objects like this, and sometimes videos, sometimes live performance with like temporary media, things like that. And each media, they are not just physically different, but they are also conceptually and contextually different. But my motif, can inhabit in this historical context of each media, and then, can have a conversation with it. So one of these media that my quick turn structure travels across is commercial objects. So when I do collaboration with fashion brands or cosmetic brands, I apply my motif to their product. And that's not just a commercial collaboration, that's how my artistic practice can go across different mediums. So that's part of my own theory. And so, usually like when artist does a commercial collaboration, often it's considered as non-authentic practice. The authentic practice is like painting or sculpture, but the product is like it's like something that you do for money sometimes. But in my case, it's more like part of authentic, keeping all the products that I did, and I give serial numbers to each work. Like this is work number. There's another term that I use for works, which is figurati. So this is like figurati number, what was it, like 184, and that's figurati 180 something. And so each works has numbers, and the commercial projects I do, they also have numbers. So it's consistent, there's no difference. So that's how I perceive the commercial projects with corporate.